Hi, everybody. I'm sorry we skipped last week because somebody was on spring break. Yeah. Okay, not going to mention anybody's names, Atlee. Okay, so we have Atlee. How do you say your last name?
Beekler.
Beekler. I wasn't going to there. I was Butchler is what I was going for. Okay. So she is at Alpine Schools, and is what's your official title?
School social worker.
Okay, school social worker.
Mhm.
Okay, so tell us about yourself. Tell us how you got where you are.
Okay, so I got my bachelor's degree at San Diego State in social work. So I knew I wanted to do social work since I was about 14. And I debated between, I was really leaning towards child protective services for a long time. And I decided I wanted to do schools when I got to high school. And, usually people's experience with counselors in schools is like you see them twice a year, right? You discuss like what classes you want to take, what colleges you're looking at, how to get into those colleges. And, I had some stuff going on at home that I was kind of like, why isn't anyone here helping me? Like, why isn't there anyone that I can talk to? Why isn't there anyone, that's willing to listen to me? And so I started looking at degrees that I could apply to colleges for, and school social work was one of them. So I went into San Diego State with social work as my degree that I wanted to. I went through my bachelor's degree, which required me to do internships at schools. So I actually interned at the Monarch School in downtown San Diego, which is a school for homeless kids. And I totally fell in love with it. I fell in love with the school social work aspect of it because it had more than the typical counselors, which more is like academic. Like I actually got to have I can't call it therapy because I was an intern, but it's mostly therapy. Like you're mostly discussing mental health and emotions and coping skills. So I started with that. I graduated with my bachelor's in social work, and then I got my master's in social work, which required 2 additional internships. So I did my first internship at a kindergarten through 8th grade school, and that was actually a school for foster kids. And then my second internship was a high school, which was a school for kids in juvenile hall. So I really, I started with homeless kids, I went to foster kids, and then I did juvenile hall kids. So I got a ton of different experience with populations, and really just started to fall in love with the school social work aspect of it.
Okay,
And
so I'm going to pause you for a sec. So when you walked into the internships at a school for homeless kids,
yeah,
what was that like for you? Because that's a lot of our students. I'm encouraging them to step off the pier into their internships or to volunteer,
yeah.
and it's terrifying. So what was
Oh,
it
it's
like?
terrifying. I got really lucky because most of the schools that work with the challenging populations have really good people working there. Like they have people that their heart's fully in it. So you really lean on, the staff that work there, and the staff that work there want you to succeed. So, I asked as many questions as I could, and you really like they fully let me go. Like they were kind of like, "Okay, I'm here if you have questions, but I'm going to trust that you know what to do," which is also scary because you're like, "Do I know what to do?"
No.
No, no, I don't. But you figure it out, and, as an intern doing social work in the schools, like you kind of feel like you're just a friend to the kids. Like you're listening to them, you're giving feedback if they want it. Like they really just want to vent to you, which anyone can do, right? Anyone
Right.
can listen to it. So you kind of lean on that as an intern and like, yeah, it's scary, but I even as an intern, I had so many times where a kid was venting to me, and I would just listen to them and just be like, yeah, I'm here if you need me, like I'm here if you need to talk more. And really they're just like, thank you so much. Like they cannot appreciate enough just having someone to listen to them, and like someone that's there that they can trust and that they know they're going to see tomorrow, because a lot of these kids, like adults come and go in their life, and they're like, wow, like just one adult that's going to be there tomorrow that I know I can see, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so if they just that's one thing is that if you get in a situation, have you had any supervisors that were jerks?
I wouldn't say jerks, but I have had supervisors that were like not there, like not present. And so when you run into situations like, I'll give you an example. I had a lot of the juvenile hall kids got very escalated for, you know, for obvious reasons. And there was a student that was cussing a teacher out on campus, and no one was around but me. So I was kind of like, okay, I guess I'm gonna be, you know, the one that's responsible for calming this kid down somehow. And I was like, you know, in my head, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Right. But somehow I got him out of the classroom, you know, and he was, I mean, he cussed me out. He was cussing me out. And I was just like, okay. I was like, I get it. You're mad. You're frustrated. Like I would be too, you know, and somehow I calmed him down and I just sat with him. And then eventually they actually sent him home because the school's like, we're not going to have, you know, a kid cuss out a teacher.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely situations where your supervisors are nowhere to be found and you're going to have to figure out what to do. And that's, you know, I've made several mistakes. I've made, you know, mistakes where after the situation, I'm like, okay, I totally could have done something better. Right. Which requires like reflection of yourself because you're not always going to have, you know, superiors to help you reflect. Like sometimes you're going to have to reflect yourself and like figure out what you could have done better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said something else that flagged me is that people are their hearts are in it.
Yeah.
And that's something that for the class, it's really important. You got to find a job where you look, it's like when you do it, you really care about doing it.
Yep.
And that's why we're talking before we started about Marvilla, who she's the one that became a lawyer, but
Yeah.
she was IO psych and her heart just wasn't in industrial organizational. And she
Yep.
wanted to work in HR, but it was literally manipulating workers for the company, not
Yeah.
helping the worker. So
100%. And
yeah,
I'll tell you this too. Like I applied for the Child Protective Services internship and they're like very picky at San Diego State. Like they will only accept a few people. And I was devastated. Like I sobbed for like I don't know how many hours. Like it was crushing to me, right? That I didn't get, you know, this internship that I wanted. And I think back on it now and I'm like, thank goodness I did not get that internship. Like because the CPS reports I have to make now, I'm like, if I was the one that had to go to that house and talk to those parents, and I'm like, that was so not the right choice for me. Like, that was not the right job. That was not, you know, so like, even if you get discouraged and you're like, I thought this was what I really wanted and I didn't get it. Sometimes it's not the best option for you. Like, sometimes, you know, that door closed for a reason and you're going to be better off later.
I serve on the board for social work for the Child Protective Services for the academic. So we send a lot of students
Yeah.
that direction of the social work program, and the dropout rate for Child Protective Services
I
is
bet.
80%. And like right now they're working on what's called secondary trauma care. So in other words, so having counselors for the counselors to get
Yeah.
counseled about having to deal with what they have to deal with.
Oh my gosh, I bet.
Yeah. And then so that's where the big push is right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got your master's degree.
Yes.
And where do you start your big one of my former students is a counselor at the local high school. She goes, I got my big girl job.
Yeah.
Where did you start your first like real job?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was actually lucky because I
You keep
applied.
saying you're lucky. It's not lucky. You're
Well,
just
no,
following a path.
okay, well, in this instance, I feel like I was lucky because I was still in my master's program when I applied to this job
Oh, cool.
and they hired me like knowing that I was going to graduate in like 2 months. So I
Wow,
didn't start until I finished, but I was lucky enough to be like, okay, I'm finishing my master's and I don't have to worry about getting a job because I have a job. Like they hired me.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I started here right after finishing my master's, which was 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and so I went back and forth for a long time on if I wanted to take a break between getting my clinical license in social work. And you know, when I started working here, I was like, oh, maybe I'll take a break. You know, that's a lot of paperwork, that's a lot of effort, like that's a lot of exams. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do it. But the fact is, when I started, I was already doing the work. Like I was putting in the hours, you know, for psychotherapy. Like I was like, I don't know why I wouldn't just immediately do it,
Right,
right?
right.
So I actually started counting my hours maybe like the first month of working here. And I found a supervisor and I
That was my
actually
next
finished.
exactly next question. So okay.
Yeah. So I found an incredible supervisor. She's amazing. She was a school social worker in Temecula for I think 10 years.
Okay.
And then she just went into private practice within the last year. So, you know, I had weekly supervision with her. I actually finished my 3,000 hours
Oh, wow.
in March. Yeah, so I did that.
Did you file everything yet, or is it still?
Yep, I filed everything.
Yay.
I know, so I'm waiting for, it takes a while for them to clear my application and then to take the exam, but I finished all my paperwork, so that was exciting.
Yeah, we've had 3 people on that same direction right now. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So you get hours for working with students.
Yep.
Oh,
Because most of what I do, I mean, so I think I have 37.5 hours a week here,
okay,
and almost all of that is working directly with students, whether that's individual counseling or group counseling. That's like the
awesome.
majority of what I do.
Cool. So do
Yeah.
you guys, so my wife we're talking about getting an RBT for you
Yeah.
guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a behavioral training certificate here where the behavioral training certificate is basically the theory and principles of behaviorism and statistics and basic psychology.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to build a pathway so students can go to the RBT route. And the company that we were working with last year folded. And so but we're basically trying to work with the school districts to try to get students in the RBT role that can help fulfill and do hours for training there.
Yeah.
So
That'd
I'll
be
be
amazing.
bugging you about that. So
Yeah, for sure.
are you okay? So as a counselor, are you a faculty or are you a contract or how does
Good
are
question.
you?
So that's a good question. So they hired me as the district social worker, right?
Okay.
And it's funny because, when we send our students to high school, like I just had transition meetings for my students with IEPs, because I also serve as the IEP counseling person. Like I serve those minutes, which is usually a school psychologist. However, so Alpine's a little bit different with that in that we have 2 school psychologists for the whole district, and they mainly do the IEP testing only. So like they don't service the minutes. They're not doing counseling. They're not doing therapy. They're only testing for IEPs. Right.
Yeah.
So when I did the transition meetings to go into the high school, my first question was, because they have counselors. So my first question was, are the counselors serving the IEP minutes? And they were like, no, we contract out. Right. So we contract out for therapists. And I think it's like, they said they have 2 for Granite Hills, like 2 therapists only that service
Yeah.
the minutes. Yeah. So I was like, oh my goodness,
And they
so,
recently just changed. They had a service, and
right.
because the service had gender affirming care, the board kicked them out. Never mind, not political. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, so I'm not contracted out. I'm technically hired within the district, which I guess is now becoming kind of rare. It's not, it's not usual. It's easier, I think, to contract out for therapy. So yeah, no, I'm like hired at the district.
But do you have like the teacher contract? Or
Yes, I'm on the teacher pay scale too.
okay, cool. Okay, that's really neat. So then you're protected by the teacher contract and tenure?
Yep, I'm the first day of my 3rd year, I was tenured.
Oh, awesome. That's so great.
Yep.
That's really cool. Okay. Interesting that they could do that without a credential.
Uh-huh.
I mean, just without a teaching credential. But anyway,
I
Alpine.
have so that's a good question though. So to do school social work, you need your PPSC. You need your
Ah,
yes, your
there you
pupils.
go.
Yes, credential.
Okay, just checking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's really cool. So like, so you can, do you know, can you do testing though? Like, because you have the clinical credentials, you technically should be able to do the testing too, right?
I can do the ERMS testing. So like the mental health aspect of IEP testing, I can
Got
do.
it. But
I
not
think
like
the
dyslexia or attention
correct,
deficit and that kind of stuff.
correct.
You're not. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay, so what is it, what does your day look like? So aside from me stealing an hour of your day, what does your typical day look like?
So, yeah, so I mostly am doing individual counseling sessions. I do run, I think I have 4 groups right now, and I try to do like I have a social skills group, I have an anxiety group, I have a grief group. And then I kind of leave it like I often have teachers approach me that they're like, that I have a few students that are dealing with this, right? So then I try to put a group together that specifically deals with whatever I'm seeing the needs are, right? But for the most part, I'm doing individual sessions. I do sometimes go into classrooms if there's a student that's like struggling with behavior. You know, like often we get so-and-so keeps calling out during class and is very disruptive. And I'm like, all right, like let me go do an observation. Let me go sit in class with them, like see what's going on, see if they're bored, see if they don't have good rapport with the teacher, like see what's going on. So there
Teacher's a jerk. Oh, sorry.
also that. I'm usually like, okay, the kid's clearly not engaged, you know, clearly doesn't care if the teacher respects them. Like something else is going on here. But you know, that's for another
Hey,
conversation.
teacher counseling. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So yeah, most of my days individual sessions, which again, just to point out, like I did consider, you know, being a counselor, like doing the counselor thing, and a lot of that would be more academic based. So if you're, you know, if you have students that are really considering doing mental health for students, like social work is really the way to go, in my opinion.
Yeah. So in the Department of Counseling, you go, when you get to the second year, you take a step left or right. And if you go toward the right, you go toward the counseling, the MFT route. If
Yep.
you go to the left, you go toward the academic counseling and career planning and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And like we have counselors here that are both.
Yep.
So they're like Rod, who's a great counselor here. He is an MFT,
Yep.
and he does personal counseling and he does stuff. Okay, so when you have, so because you're dealing with little people, what can you explain to the class what it how well they're not adults yet.
That's true.
And so when you're dealing with a kid and they unload a bucket of crap on you,
Yep.
you're a mandated reporter. What do
Yep.
you have to do?
So, and I'll say when like my first year, and to be honest, the internships do not prepare you for that. Like, I'll just be real. They don't prepare you at all.
No.
So my first year, you know, whenever I had a hard day, it was because I had to make a CPS report or I had to do a suicide risk assessment. Right. And
You're at a middle school, just for the folks.
I'm at a middle school. Yeah. So it's grades 6 through 8th. And you know, sometimes I've had to go to the elementary school to do a risk assessment, which is like a whole other ball game. Completely, you know, if I'm used to talking to like 13-year-olds about it, going in to talk to an 8-year-old is way different, way different,
Yeah, this the whole the state of mind is
way
completely
different.
yeah.
Yeah. But so what was your question again? I lost.
So how do you no, but so if a kid
Oh
unloads
yeah.
something like they're being abused or their
Oh
mom's
yeah.
never home or their dad their friends keep coming over and staying up late and
Yeah.
it's like because I've heard stories just from my wife being a teacher for so many years of stuff that she's heard and had to call on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you get more yuck than she would.
100%. So I think the biggest, I would say the biggest challenge in that is not so much hearing all of that stuff, because I feel like at least in grad school, like they do really prepare you for that. And you know, I can't count how many times in classes they talk about like, you know, burnout and compassion fatigue and like making sure that you're not taking on all the stuff that you hear, right? So I feel like I was prepared for that. Like I was prepared to,
Compassion fatigue.
yeah.
That is not something our country has. Okay. Okay, carry on.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, but so I feel like I was prepared for that. What I was not prepared for was the times where, you know, I feel like when you're in classes, they try to tell you to be very transparent with your clients, right? Like if you're making a CPS report, to be honest and be like, I am a mandated reporter. I am gonna have to report what you're telling me. And with a kid, they don't understand. Like it comes to essentially begging me, like, please don't. That's gonna make it worse. You know, my dad's gonna get mad at me that you did that. And in your head, you're like, I'm reporting on abuse, and this is gonna make the abuse worse. Like you're like, what am I supposed to do? Right? It's a lot of gray area. Like, should I tell the kid that I'm gonna do this? If I tell the kid, is it gonna make it worse? But I want to be transparent. So I have had a lot of situations where I didn't, just because I felt like it was better, as in didn't tell the kid that I was gonna make a CPS report.
Yeah.
Because I felt like it would be better for the kid not to know. And you know, we've had parents come here to campus screaming, you know, at staff, like, who made the CPS report and why did you do that? People get angry, like people get very angry when they're called out. So
That's the reason we called, by the way.
yeah,
The
yeah,
fact
I'm
that you're
always
here.
like, okay, I made the right choice.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you had nothing to hide, you wouldn't be very angry.
That's like have you watched the Freedom Writers?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's why they had the anonymous journals, is
But
because
yes,
you wanted them to help share their trauma without
exactly.
having to call
Incredible
CPS every
movie.
time.
I
Yeah.
love it.
We went and met them they were at
Yeah,
USD, and
love that.
they did a talk, and we went and actually had a cool thing. So,
That's incredible.
okay.
For sure, I remember watching that movie like in high school, and I was like, wow, I want to do something like that. Like she made such a difference in their lives.
Yeah. And it carries on because they're doing the same thing with other kids. So,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so how much reports and that kind of stuff do you have to write as a part of your gig?
Yeah, I've made a lot of reports, and often I even tell, if I'm just having casual conversations with someone and I'm like, yeah, I actually make a lot of CPS reports. I don't even know if I could count how many I've done. People are often shocked, especially like Alpine, that specific community. They don't, not to get political, but they're not big on social workers. Like there was a lot there when the first social worker was hired in this district, there was a lot of and there's still a lot of stigma. If I call a parent and I'm a social worker, immediately they go to CPS, right? They're like, okay, you're a CPS worker. And I have to explain, no, I'm not. I work at the school and I make CPS reports, but I'm not a CPS reporter.
Right.
So I wouldn't say they're frequent, but for sure, at least once a month, maybe every month, maybe more than that.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for those I mean, people around here know Alpine, but Alpine is very conservative,
Yes.
and it's very, but at the same, it's very Texas, where
Yes.
people are really loyal to their neighbors, very distrustful of
100%.
big system, and it's so like it's a very in-group, out-group place, and
Yep.
so there's a lot of just anxiety and shenanigans that the kids have.
100%.
And so how do you deal with the kids that are just so defiant? I mean, because there's a lot of kids, I mean, just from working up there with my wife, there's a lot of kids that are just very defiant to the whole system. And we're
Yep.
seeing this across schools everywhere.
Yep.
So do you have a group of defiant kids together and go play rugby or something? Or
It's funny because there's one specific group here that
yeah.
is yeah,
Not to
that
mention,
is
not
yeah.
that I've heard anything, but okay, yeah.
And I'll tell you, they're my favorite. Not that I have favorites, but they're my favorite. Like they're the tough kids are for sure my favorite to work with. Mostly because they tend to gravitate towards me. I'll tell you, they're not defiant with me. They may be
That's awesome.
defiant. Yeah, they may be defiant with other teachers, but they are not defiant to me. And I attribute that to, me actually having taken the time to build rapport, right? And get to know them. And most of the time, they communicate to me how they feel like I am the only person on campus that respects them.
That was
And
what
that's
I
huge.
hope, yeah.
Yeah,
Because a lot of the kids that are posturing and trying to be defiant are just looking for respect.
100%.
And
They feel
that's
like no one respects them. And that's especially for a teenager, that's huge.
yeah,
Huge. Yeah.
yeah.
But
And yeah, these guys are burgeoning teenagers. Yeah, and I can imagine that a lot of the, elementary school stuff, because
yeah,
your partner in crime is what's her name?
Cameron.
Cameron, yeah. Doesn't she work mostly with the little kids?
She does. Yes. She works at the preschool mainly, but she often goes to the elementary school.
Yeah, and so that's so
Completely.
I wanted to talk to her too eventually, but
Yeah.
you were just more responsive on email than she was.
I'll make sure she responds to you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's just I really wanted to, but okay, so as a career though,
Yeah.
do you see yourself in this, following the standard old teacher lady role,
Yeah.
or do you see yourself moving on to something bigger than Alpine? Would you go to like Standing Unified, or I mean, it's a great gig, so I wouldn't I wouldn't cut bait until you had something big.
I'm gonna be like, Jenna, your
No,
husband convinced me to leave Alpine.
yeah,
Um,
hold on. Yeah,
no,
ERBT in
so
place first.
no one knows this here, but I have looked to be completely honest, like my first year was the roughest, and I for sure was constantly on EdJoin. That's the portal for school districts to hire people. I was constantly on EdJoin, like looking for social work jobs, looking for social work jobs. And I eventually decided that since I started counting my hours for my clinical license, it would be better for me to just stay here, finish my hours, and then consider leaving. And since I finished my hours, it's definitely in the back of my mind, like I could go to private practice if I wanted to.
Right. But
Yeah.
there's something about building I mean, 'cause my wife has been in that school district since 1997 or
Yeah.
96 or 7.
Which is
Uh,
when I was born.
yeah. And she could have been your kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
And so the part about being in a district for a long time is that you get to know the community, and the traumas that come with the community are very similar,
Yep.
and you get to, I don't know, there's something about having that consistent voice and the consistent idea,
Sure.
and but
And
but yeah,
that and breaks.
yeah, breaks are, I mean, I mean, I always teach during breaks, so I always have extra classes that I always fill in during the summer and the winter session. And
Yeah.
but the whole idea that if we have, I mean, having a social worker on campus, someone who's actually there to help kids and de-escalate situations, is huge.
It's huge.
And even if you have a teacher that's trained as a social worker, it's really impossible to
Yep.
do a good teaching job and focus on the needs
Right.
of a particular kid.
Right. And, when because the district didn't really know what social work was originally, and they didn't really know, clinical, they still they can't say LCSW. Like, they're like, what is it again? What's it called again? And so, they kind of designed this, well, hopefully they're designing this position for a clinical licensed social worker, if I do choose to stay, which would again be huge. Like, they would have a clinical social worker on campus, right? That is able to provide psychotherapy to students, which is like a big, even from just a school social worker to being a licensed social worker on campus, like that's a big step. Um,
Well, and
so
if you get your supervisor, this is the next sleazy step. If you get your supervisor credential,
yeah.
then you can have
Oh
students
yeah.
in. I mean, that's what we have 4 or 5 grad students at the PsyD program at Alliant that come and do counseling here to our students.
Yeah.
And it's great because they're like, they have a supervisor and they have an office set up, and I think there's 4 of them now,
Yeah.
and they see clients daily.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's why our RBT plan, um, for, for Alpine is, because I mean, if we have a lot of kids with special needs, especially at Shadow, and now going to
Oh
be at
yeah.
Boulder next year.
Oh
And
yeah.
because we have a lot of those kids, if we had extra bodies that are actually trained in
100%.
behavioral modification, it would be so much easier
Huge.
for the teachers to help.
Yeah.
If we can figure out to get the pathway set up, but
Yeah. Love it.
all right, I've got to go get a giant poster printer working. It's over in the we're going to WPA, Western Psychological Association. We have a research group, and
Yeah.
my little students in the research group got their poster accepted.
Okay. That's
And
great.
it's awesome. We're going to San Francisco.
Yeah.
The
That's
college is paying
amazing.
for it. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we got to print the poster, and we're leaving like a week from Wednesday.
Okay.
And but they have a printer, and so I'm going to go see if I can get it to work.
Good.
I'm skilled with that. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Get back
Yeah,
to
of
work.
course.
Jenna
Yeah.
goes, wait, what time are you doing it? That's her work hours. I'm like, I don't know.
It's just a meeting. It's just a meeting.
No, this is really important. It's like, look at this. I said I gotta go, and Ted's like, "Can we go?"
Oh, Ted, he's so cute. Oh, buddy.
Yeah, you need a dog. You need a dog.
100%. I'm
and-
working on it. I have a chocolate lab puppy, and I'm working on getting him as a therapy dog. Working on
Yeah.
it.
The only problem is the labbies are sheddy and itchy for people that are allergic
That
to dogs.
is true.
Teddy is not.
Teddy is not.
So you should take the behavioral psych course. Yeah, but Ted's almost certified. He's doing
Aw.
really well with other dogs. He's typically a jerk with other dogs. And we're trying to make him. I'm sorry. He's looking at me now. Okay. Thank you again. I appreciate
Yeah,
it. Fight
of
with this
course.
printer.
Of course. Let me know, if your students have other questions or anything, like I'm totally
I will
fine
put
with
your
you.
email too.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.